many have heard of the Battle of Wyoming, also known as the Wyoming Massacre? There we go. There's a painting of it. It sounds like something connected with George Custer, doesn't it? Well, in fact, it took place in 1778, on this very day, July 3rd, in the Wyoming Valley, which is in Pennsylvania. More than 300 Americans were slaughtered by the British and the Iroquois that they had recruited to be their allies. Today, the area is known as the Scranton and Wilkes-Barre Metropolitan Area. So it's in Pennsylvania, that's the Wyoming Valley. So now you know something about July 3rd you didn't know before. July 3rd is also the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. In 1913, the 50th anniversary, I guess it's just too dark up here. Can you still see that, or how's that?
That's fine.
Okay. In 1913, they had the 50th anniversary, and the surviving veterans of both sides reenacted Pickett's Charge. Anybody have ever heard of Pickett's Charge? It was sort of unsuccessful charge on the Confederate side. And Pickett, the guy who forgot his name, was asked years later why his effort failed, and he said, "Well, I've always thought that the Yankees had something to do with it."
Kid room is open if anybody wants to send their kids over.
Okay, very good. Small kids that want to go and play with other little ones. She's being so good. Of course, it's too early in the day for them to need a nap. Don't worry, you won't miss anything important. I'm lying, it's all important. Anyways, July 3rd is also the date in which the last pair of mating great auks were killed near Iceland in 1844. What the heck were great auks? They look like penguins, don't they? They were the penguins of the north. Great auks, dead ones, were by then, by 1844, quite valuable because they were almost all extinct. And the two men who killed them were doing so to get specimens for somebody. So these were the northern hemisphere's penguins. There were once millions of them. Our Neanderthal, we know now that some of the Neanderthals are among our ancestors. They used to eat them because they found auk bones in with their remains in camps. And we typically think of the dodo, sometimes a passenger pigeon, when we think of animals killed off by our ancestors. So add the great auk to that.
That was the time when they went extinct?
1844, they killed, on July 3rd, 1844, they killed the last pair and smashed their egg. How many have a birthday today? Anybody have a birthday in July?
My sibling's birthday today.
When is your birthday? The 19th? And Aaron?
20th.
The 20th, 19th and the 20th. What are the odds? Actually, probably pretty high consecutive days. Anyways, if you're born today, you'd also have share a birthday with Franz Kafka, Montel Williams, Tom Cruise, and Dave Barry, the humorist. So earlier I said that we were having a worship service here. What worship service? I'm going to walk out right now. So the 21st century deity called Wikipedia says that worship is an act of religious devotion usually directed towards the deity. Usually. Not us, not here, not a supernatural deity anyway. Turn that down a tad. But what about a non-supernatural deity? What about an imaginary deity, an imaginary being? How about a fictional, ideal human being, which is what gods are? Well, there was this 19th century and the act of religious devotion, that's from the Wikipedia. So here's this 19th century British scientist, T.H. Huxley. No, he's not an ideal human being, but he became a pretty good one. His nickname was Darwin's Bulldog because he really tenaciously defended the theory of evolution by natural selection. And this is actually his quote here in a debate in response to the Bishop Wilberforce, who tried to ridicule him by asking whether he was descended from an ape on his mom's side or his dad's side. Well, after reading Darwin's Origin of Species for the first time, Huxley is reputed to have said, "How extremely stupid of me not to have thought of that." But he also said, "If some great power would agree to make me always think what is true and do what is right, on the condition of being turned into a sort of clock and wound up every morning, I should instantly close with the offer." Now, Huxley's idea of a clock-like person is an interesting one, since it had only been about 100 years before that, in 1747, that this French physician, La Mettrie, famously argued in his book, The Human Machine, Man and Machine, that a mechanism is exactly what people are. And he was exactly right. Had Huxley put that together with the idea of natural selection, it might have occurred to him that human beings aren't always thinking what's true and doing what is right, because maybe that doesn't come with a reproductive advantage. There was just something recently in scientific studies where they found that bonobos lie about sex. It's more complicated than that, but there's deception involved in how they reproduce. Mainly the females appearing to be receptive and indeed and fertile when they're not. That was how that would be explained. And here's a clockwork person for the left. At any rate, no one seems to have accused Huxley of wanting to be his own God, although except for omnipotence, this is exactly what he said, right? He wanted to always do what's right, think what's true, and the only thing missing there would be omnipotence. So, compare the alleged deities that believers are always assuring us are all-powerful, he, she, or it. They must be extremely stupid and or not in the habit of doing what's right. And what's better? Which is more deserving of admiration and devotion, to be all-powerful, but not to use that power to prevent obvious evils, or to be able to reliably recognize and distinguish right from wrong, even without having the power to put every wrong right. Indeed, what is more admirable and worthy of worship if the choice is between deities and a person, even if it's a person who thinks what is true and does what is right only some of the time? And yet we're supposed to feel bad about not thinking what is true and doing what is right all of the time? Like at our last service where we had this young man accompany his friend, and he found Christianity because he's just such a terrible person. He stole a stick of gum once upon a time. No, I don't think we're supposed to think of and feel ourselves inferior to alleged deities. They're either stupid, evil, or not all-powerful after all. So to be an atheist is not trying to be your own God. It certainly isn't claiming to always think what is true and do what is right, even though those who speak for deities claim to have those powers, or claim that they're deities for whom they speak do. But not to worship the supernatural or holy books doesn't stop reasonable people from revering what is deserving of reverence. We can still honor what is honorable, and yes, worship in the sense of revering and honoring what is worthy of that. It's just that delusions about impossible and absurd things are not worthy of such regard. Now, all that said, when we think about right and wrong, we are in some sense always thinking about what the hypothetical, imaginary, and fictional ideal human being, God, would do. But what would the better angels of our nature, as they say. Believers, amazingly, they don't do anything like this. Their idea about where morality comes from is that their deities just arbitrarily decide about it, and then they lay down the law as to what is right and wrong. That is, their God is the one that wants to be his own God, and they suppose this is okay because their God has ultimate absolute power. Makes no sense, right? So, we, on the other hand, to the extent that we try to follow through, however imperfectly, on our ideas about what an ideal being would think best, or even what is least bad, election year, we get to choose between the lesser evils, at least we're honoring, revering, and worshiping that ideal of intelligence and goodwill, even though it's an imaginary, which is to say not unreal in the sense that we can't think of it. Everything, this whole building started out imaginary, on paper, an idea. So although as said, modern believers have this wrong-headed approach, we should not be ashamed or embarrassed, much less offended, that this mistake is rooted in the earliest efforts at trying to get at this, what would an ideal being say or do. And after all, those earliest efforts of our ancestors were hampered by a perfectly understandable belief in the supernatural. At least their intentions were good. They had really no alternatives, and it was they that also began the process of exorcising the gods from, as Carl Sagan put it, the demon-haunted world. It's somewhat impressive, really, that we got to where we are today, given that the human neurological processes make supernaturalism seem so natural. So this is what an atheist church, this church, is about. We human beings can't not think about this world we find ourselves in, both objectively, and all the things we can all observe, and just from internally, the things that only we can figure out, about how to think and what to believe in the right way, or at least a better way, to behave and live our lives so that life is worth living, or becomes worth living. We cannot and we should not abandon these questions and these challenges that so bear that bear so much on the meaning of our lives. We cannot, should not leave them to those who continue to wallow, and very discouragingly so, in supernaturalism, in unthinking and hateful ways, very ugly and dissatisfying ways of looking at things. If we just say, oh, that's all religion, and do nothing but curse the darkness, then we're part of the problem. If we do that, we dishonor all those who have tried as best they could to light candles. If we really disapprove of religion, whatever you hold that to be, because of how badly it's turned out, how much it's been abused and broken and corrupted, then we should show how it's done better. And that's the mission and purpose of this church. This should be a part of the mission and the purpose of all freethinkers, I think, to reboot religion, to reimagine religion without the superstition and the supernaturalism and the ridiculousness and the hatred and unhappiness that go with those things. For just as religion is not science, it should not be pseudoscience. We can't let people getting away with saying, oh, I believe in this crazy thing that's completely contrary to science, creationism, or whatever, but that's my religion. No, that's not what religion is. We have to take that back from them. To reimagine religion is precisely the right word also, because it's always been imagination anyway. And that's a good thing. As I said, we need to keep in mind that we make our ideas, and we are free to alter them, extend them, or even reject them and replace them with new ideas when that is needed. Of course, we should be careful about how we do this, but it is our responsibility. It's an important responsibility, and the NTCOF is about accepting and acting on that responsibility. So here's a boiled down version of our principles, what we take to be real religion and spirituality, the meat of what is important when it comes to religious questions, with the bones of superstition removed. Any vegetarians here? Or maybe I didn't want to, okay, so not real bad, okay. You eat meat once in a while just to keep from being a fanatic, right? Okay, so, but anyways, the analogy wouldn't work for vegetarians, I suppose. So next month's service is August 7th, 5 weeks from today, so that's going to be a long time, an extra week. We're going to try then to scratch the surface of a huge subject we haven't dealt with before, which is education. Are you a teacher, or you're going, so you and I should talk about what we should not neglect to deal with that service. Kit Robertson, who's not here right now, she was the one who suggested this topic. You know, we might not think about education very much, but we will when we start driving through the school zones again, or our own kids go back to school. Our schools, as we know, are a huge arena for the continuing culture wars. Recently there was some attention on the idea that creationism can't be taught or shouldn't be taught to children in public schools because evolution is part of the religion of atheism. We'll consider that and related things at our August service, and many of you have experience in our schools, and I want to get your input on this subject, so please, Jacqueline, and email me if you absolutely don't care to, that's okay too. Perhaps you'd like to let me know your thoughts, even all of us have been in school, so you have thoughts, or if you'd like to say a few words yourself about that subject in August, let me know so we can start putting that together. Please check out our website at churchofreethought.org. It's sort of not as easy to read there. Thanks to Rusty's efforts, there's arguably more original material there from our church's 21 plus years of effort than I think any other site except maybe infanthouse.org. There's also a forum under the services section where you can post your ideas, including there's a post thread started on each of our services. You can come in and say, I like this, I didn't like that, whatever your thoughts were. You do need to sign up, which is easy, just to keep out the spammers and the bots. And that's been working fine, I think, Rusty, huh? Mm-hmm. And go to our Facebook page and sign up for our Twitter feed. The URL's on the back page of the bulletin today. So who is with Dennis Sullivan with the younger freethinkers then?
And Kit.
Huh?
And Kit.
And Kit. Oh, Kit's here too then. All right, terrific. So they're with their younger freethinkers today. Believe me, that is not just babysitting. Our young freethinkers need food for thought too, and after all, we have, most of us had years to learn how to deal with all the crazy superstition and nonsense in the world. We need volunteers to help. We were just talking about how we're going to coordinate that. Why did you get here earlier? And I know why, with the kids. But we need to have a better system for managing that. Really, this is a lot of fun. As I say, many hands make light work. As it is said, a great saying that's not in the Bible. Being with our younger freethinkers can be a lot of fun. It's being part caretaker supervisor, part teacher, part counselor, and 100% sharing with those who have so much to learn about how to be good and thoughtful people. And how else would they learn if not from us? Let's help see to it that they don't have to come to Freethought through as much personal effort and hardship as many of us did. So the next Freethought Book Club is August 20th. Nero is not here today. He said he was going to be absent. This is probably going to be again at Farina's Winery in Grapevine. More information about that at the back side of the bulletin. The book being discussed, Bill Nye's Science Guy, Undeniable. Flat out with his own name, how cute. Now finally, we have a get well card for Mark Barnick, who's normally our welcomer. Mark had a stroke about 3 weeks ago and is recovering. So Paul Myers brought a get well card for us to pass around and sign. You have that? So we'll get that to Mark. He has said he doesn't want visitors. Do you have a pen? I have a pen, pass it around with the card. Sign it, add any other little personalization. I'm sure Mark would like to know that he's being thought of. Heck of a thing to go through. So sign and pass along as we go through here. So our moment of science, Juno and Jupiter. So here we are, it's a church, we're going to talk about gods, right? Who was Juno? She was the wife of Jupiter, the Roman queen of the gods. And of course, Jupiter, he was also the king of the Roman deities, the emperor of that whole pantheon. And, well, of course, Jupiter is also the largest planet of our solar system. Well, that must be why they named this spacecraft Juno. It was launched on August 5th, 2011 to investigate the planet Jupiter. They named the spacecraft Juno, and it arrived for its orbital insertion, like Captain Kirk, we're ready to assume standard orbit tomorrow, July 4th. And I think NASA did this deliberately. Was there any talk about that, John? Did you hear anything? Because they did the same thing with the Pathfinder and the little robot Sojourner back in, I think it was like 1977. It landed and was deployed on July 4th.
I think it's a coincidence. They usually have very narrow windows for choosing
Oh, I
one.
have a hard time with
Yeah.
that. But it was very smart of NASA to do it that way on July 4th, because, and of course, NASA, one of our few government agencies that I'm sure their funding depends very much on public support. So, got a couple of videos to show here. Movie time. Number one. So that's tomorrow.
The scariest thing to me about Juno are the unknowns. So much about the environment that we'll have to withstand is unknown. Nothing's really certain about what's going to happen.
It's a monster. It's unforgiving. It's relentless. It's spinning around so fast, it's gravity. It's like a giant slingshot, slinging rocks, dust, electrons, whole comets. Anything that gets close to it becomes its weapon. It just so happens, deep inside this body, are the secrets we're after. Secrets about our early solar system.
It's the biggest and baddest planet in the solar system, and it's got the biggest and baddest radiation and the biggest and baddest magnetic field.
The background radiation that we're exposed to on Earth is about a third of the red. What we expect to see at Jupiter is about 20 million red. No spacecraft has ever flown this close to Jupiter. flown this deep into the radiation belts.
So the real trick is, we're gonna go in close, get the data, and get out. And the first time we go in, that's the most dangerous. We call it Jupiter orbit insertion.
Nothing's really certain about what's going to happen.
Happening tomorrow, folks.
What's interesting is that it's actually, they're using solar panels on that one, and normally they don't.
Yeah.
Magnetic fields have been a curiosity for thousands of years. And so, of course, we know now that magnetic fields are generated by what's called dynamo action, the convective motion of an electrically conducting fluid. Even though we can map the Earth's magnetic field with extraordinary accuracy with satellites in orbit about the Earth, the one thing we can't do is see clearly through all the crustal magnetization that is right beneath our feet. Jupiter is a gaseous planet, hydrogen, helium. There is no magnetized crust that obscures our view of the dynamo deep below. So the exciting part about the Jupiter mission is that we'll be able to image for the first time the magnetic field on the dynamo surface in a way that would never ever be possible on Earth. Jupiter is also the planet with the largest magnetic field. Its magnetosphere is huge. If you were to look up into the night sky, and if you could see the outline of its magnetosphere, which you can, it would be about the size of the moon in the sky. It's a very, very large magnetosphere. In fact, in the Voyager program, we learned that the magnetic tail, the part of the magnetosphere that is drawn away from the sun, extends all the way out to the orbit of Saturn and in all likelihood beyond. It's a very large feature in our solar system. It's a pity we can't see it. Juno is the fastest spacecraft ever to venture into the outer solar system. It's the first to orbit pole to pole about Jupiter, and it's the most heavily shielded spacecraft that we've ever launched. The mission is designed to basically wrap Jupiter in a dense net of observations, completely covering the sphere. So to do that, we need a polar orbit, one that passes over the North Pole, along a line of longitude, and over the South Pole. And we do this over the 37 orbits of the nominal mission, and by the time we're done, we've got orbits separated in longitude by about every 12 degrees. So we completely cover the sphere. A magnetometer is, it's best to think of it as a fancy compass. Unlike a compass that just records the direction of the magnetic field, our instrument tells you both what direction the field is in and what the magnitude is. And we can measure that very, very accurately to 100 parts per million. Juno's magnetometer is another in a long line of magnetometers built here at Goddard Space Flight Center, following designs developed by Mario Cunha years ago. Our instrument is between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude more accurate than anything that's flown to Jupiter before. And of course, part of that is the result of the star cameras that we're able to fly with our sensors so that we can determine the absolute orientation in space of these sensors. If we did not know the orientation of the sensor as well as we can determine it with the star cameras, we would lose accuracy in the vector measurement. So we carry 4 star cameras with our 2 magnetometer sensors. These have to be held in the same orientation with respect to each other under very extreme environmental conditions. So we designed what we call a magnetometer optical bench. It's a special structure, about a square foot in size, that is made of a carbon silicon carbide material, almost impossible to machine. But once it's fabricated and the sensors are assembled, they act as one. And that's one of the reasons why we can achieve much higher accuracy than has ever been attempted before. We hope to learn more about how a magnetic field is generated by dynamo action deep in a planet's interior. For me, the great excitement is the opportunity to look down and get the first clear, unobstructed view of what the magnetic field looks like on the surface of a dynamo where it's generated. It's always incredible to be the first person in the world to see anything. We stand to be the first to be able to look down upon the dynamo and see it clearly for the first time.
So orbital insertion is tomorrow, but the Juno spacecraft has already
Remember how they showed the lines of magnetic force in the magnetic field are actually spread out from Jupiter? Spacecraft has already passed, hit the, what they call the bow shock of that. And this is a couple of recordings of that. I think it repeats. Here's the spacecraft where you see the line going. It's going to hit that magnetic field. So that's pretty exciting. That's been your moment of science.
Dan, I got one more for you here that was just a news story on the phone the other day. Let's see if everybody can see this.
John is an astronomy space enthusiast, probably the best one of us.
Jupiter has really intense auroras, and this
Oh,
is,
yes.
this is a composite image of visual, high-resolution visual image plus image in ultraviolet light, which picks up the aurora. You can see this is an aurora on steroids. on Jupiter's pole.
You don't see any pictures of the Earth from space like that.
You mentioned that it's like 48 minutes from us seeing it. Everything that's happening is 48 minutes.
Oh, yes, yes, the fact that,
Yeah.
right. It's because it's quite a distance away and it takes 48 minutes, is that what it would? I don't know.
Light takes 48,
Right.
so the signal.
If you remember, even the astronauts on the moon, I think, was there a 2-minute delay or something like that? Or
No,
seconds? Okay, but when you're far away, it's Jupiter, it's near no longer.
There's also, of course, have you ever seen pictures of Io, the only other
Oh, yes.
body in the solar system with active volcanism? Because of all the ionic, of all the material that's being spewed off the surface of Io, it forms an ion trail around Jupiter. And there's actually a current, millions of amps of current flowing between Jupiter and Io along that trail.
Amazing. Yeah, so this is all pretty exciting stuff, so another reason to be patriotic and proud of our country. By the way, does anyone mind all the planets in the space program being named after deities? Aren't you glad we're pretty much all atheists about those gods now, even Christians? Isn't it great that Christians didn't think to like rename all the planets in the days of the week? Glad of that. And so far, at least, our homegrown believers have not insisted that any subsequent space probes be named Jesus. So that's been your moment of science. Well, tomorrow is the July 4th Independence Day holiday, and as we know, there are those who insist that America is a Christian nation. And it is in the same sense that it is a lot of other things that a majority of its citizens share. But the official religion of the United States is no religion, or rather, whatever religion you want to have, or none. As the First Amendment famously states, there shall be no law respecting an establishment of religion. And this has been interpreted by the Supreme Court, notably in the 1971 Lemon case. How many have heard of that? The Lemon case, out of which the Lemon test comes, yes. As meaning that, and this is one of the prongs of the three-prong Lemon test, that the principal or primary effect of a government action, quote, must be one that neither advances nor inhibits religion. Now remember, the principal or primary effect, so you teach evolution in school, the principal or primary effect is to educate the kids on science. And the fact that it has a secondary effect, that doesn't matter. We'll talk more about that next month. Anyways, Lemon was an 8-to-1 decision, by the way. It appears that the one was Justice Thurgood Marshall, and I thought, what the heck happened there? Why would he vote the other way? But actually, he just didn't participate in the case. And I have not yet been able to find out why that was, whether he was laid up in the hospital or something. So we are justly proud, I think, of state church separation in our nation. It was a distinctly American innovation at the time that was emulated after that in the civilized world. And indeed, I think it can be well argued that it helps to distinguish the civilized from the uncivilized world, whether or not there is state church separation. Being proud of this might be the wrong word, though. Maybe we can't justly be proud of something that we haven't ourselves had a hand in. If you're tooling around the internet, you want to go to YouTube, look up Doug Stanhope and nationalism, and he does a really funny routine in which he ridicules people who say things like, in his words, "If we hadn't saved the French in 2 world wars, they'd be speaking German right now." As if the people who say such things personally did know what they boast of. At the same time, it's been recognized for some time that the United States, with its religious freedom and the consequent diversity of its religious expression, has also had a kind of popular and distinctive civil religion. We talked a little bit about this before the service started, that we always think about state-church separation as something that benefits the church. But actually, it wouldn't have been there if it didn't also benefit the state. The state gets the benefit of having all these zealous believers behind it. So once you make that separation, so we know, the church doesn't get supported, but think about the state loses something as well. So it's been recognized for some time that the United States has kind of a popular or distinctive, what the sociologists call civil religion, and this serves the purpose of encouraging an emotional attachment to the state, which is of obvious importance. That is, we forget that with traditional state-church entanglement, as I said, the government loses the support when that's severed. The United States civil religion can be seen as filling this void, serving really the same function as a religion with which the government could be, but is prohibited from being combined. So this civil religion takes as its sacred scripture primarily the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. How many especially, you turn on the radio with these talk shows now, the Constitution this, the Constitution that. And I'd rather have them doing that than the Bible this and the Bible that. And secondarily, a wealth of material related to the ideas in these documents from the time of the American Revolution and the revered founding fathers who set the nation in motion in the late 18th century. And this civil religion has its holy places like Valley Forge, Monticello, symbols such as the American flag and the Statue of Liberty. Have you ever been to the National Archives? Who here has been there? So this display, did you go and see the displays of that, the Declaration and the Constitution? They're enshrined like holy relics here. Look at the armed guards on either side. It looks like a chapel or something in there. It's a shrine. So these are meant to evoke strong emotions. And the civil religion of America even has a devil. Come on. Benedict Arnold, right? And yet most of us don't know too much about him. We don't know too much about the biblical devil either. Judas, that's another one, right. Well, here's a fresco that's in the dome of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was completed in 1865 by the Greek-Italian artist Constantino Brumidi. This guy previously worked for the Vatican. It really looks like something that you might see on the ceiling of a church, doesn't it? I don't know if you can make him out, but this is George Washington. Sitting up there like God.
Where are all these other people?
They look like a bunch of angelic beings. There are some identifiable people. We'll get to that in just a minute. So here we see George Washington. That's a close-up, and below him the armored Liberty, fighting off the tyrants and kings and despots, and see the rainbow in the sky, of course, beneath where George Washington and his attendants are.
Where are all those people beneath Liberty?
Above George Washington, they're holding this banner which says E pluribus unum. Don't tell the fundamentalists. They'll climb up there and spray paint it out, put in God we trust.
One out of many, was it?
Correct. Out of many, one, right. This sector shows the goddess Minerva, pointing to an electrical generator and a printing press. And here's Benjamin Franklin, Samuel F.B. Morse, and steamboat inventor Robert Fulton. And to her right, here's a teacher. They've got a divider. They're learning math. Don't see anything like that on our money. Neil Tyson's complained about that, but here it is in the ceiling of the rotunda of the Capitol building. Of course, none of us approve of the late addition to our coins and currency of, in God we trust. But we see also the non-theological symbols and slogans connected with America's civil religion. In fact, there's some quacks on the internet talking about the all-seeing eye and the pyramid and so forth. And of course, look at these words. Novus Ordo Seclorum. And there's a book by that title that talks about some of the philosophical things at issue of the day. Novus Ordo Seclorum means a new order of the ages. So they really understood that they were starting something that was going to change history and change the world. A very, very unique thing about America's history and what it means to be an American. It's more about this in the bulletin. But anyways, this in God we trust with the other things is kind of like baby Jesus being okay on the courthouse lawn as long as Frosty the Snowman and Santa Claus and some candy canes are there too. In 1962, the dean of Yale Law School, Eugene Rostow, and when I first read about this years ago, the guy's name was Dean Rostow, and I thought Dean was his first name, but no, he was just dean of the law school there. But in 1962, he wrote this article in which he expressed the opinion that the government's, as he called it, conventional and uncontroversial practices that are obviously religious and theological, are really just relatively meaningless expressions of what he called ceremonial deism. 22 years later, this term made its way into a Supreme Court case when Justice William J. Brennan, in the Christmas decoration case of Lynch, from which he dissented, by the way, he thought they didn't go far enough, suggested that the motto and under God and the Pledge of Allegiance might be excused as instances of ceremonial deism. And Brennan went on to say that these expressions, quote, have lost through rote repetition any significant religious content. Well, when Newdow had his case to remove under God from the pledge, and the NTCUF filed an amicus with the Supreme Court, it's not something we do all the time, we just did in that particular case. And by the way, this is a little thing I found on the internet too, the irony of putting in God we trust right in front of the face of Thomas Jefferson, of all people. Here's the famous belt buckle that the Nazis, see, there's the swastika, and it says Gott mit uns, God is on our side. And of course, in local areas here, we have them putting in God we trust on their sheriffs and police cars and so forth. Haven't given up their guns though. Yes, they trust guns more than they trust God. Anyway, in the NTCOF amicus brief, we pointed out it would indeed violate the religion clauses if, through governmental institution of ceremonial deism, words and expressions having religious significance were thereby to become drained of such meaning. But perhaps that's a good thing if the effect is to put Yahweh and Jesus on a level with Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva. We often complain when candidates for public office or public officials talk like ministers, and even President Obama has done this, but it fits with the civil religion ideas. One writer observed, throughout American history, the president has provided the leadership to the public faith. Sometimes he's functioned primarily as a national prophet, as did Abraham Lincoln. Occasionally he has served primarily as the nation's pastor, as did Dwight Eisenhower. And at other times he's performed primarily as the high priest of the civil religion, as did Ronald Reagan. There's an extended quote in today's bulletin from Abraham Lincoln, too, which has to do, certainly does relate to this civil religion and the things that bind people together as Americans. So in many ways, you know, I really think, I don't know, how many of you think this is a good thing? It's really certainly a lot better having a state religion with God and all that sort of thing. I think it could be seen as a good thing, certainly better than the fervor that causes some to hate other people they don't even know. But just like any religion, civil religion has its dangers. It can be, it has, it is being construed to exclude and divide instead of to include and unite. As atheists, we feel that even though we know many of the founders were non-Christians, how many believers know that Thomas Jefferson both authored the Declaration and said, we know this, question with boldness even the existence of God, because if there be one, he must more approve the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. So I don't think it's too hard for an atheist to also have the civil religion. And especially when we have from the Treaty of Tripoli, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. But I think the words that follow that are important too. Has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslimen and Muslims. As the said states have never entered into any war or act of hostility against a Mohammedan nation, a Muslim nation. It declared by the parties to this treaty that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. And this was the treaty with Tripoli. But now realize something else about this. You know, it was a treaty with the Muslims, and ISIS may not accept it, but perhaps sensible Muslims as long ago as the 18th century realized that their religion and the ideals of the United States, its civil religion, are not incompatible. And did you know that the very first country to recognize the new nation of the United States in 1777, while the Revolutionary American Revolution was still going on, even before we won our independence, the first country to recognize us was, anybody know?
Was it
Morocco. It was Morocco. I wonder if prospective new Americans, especially Muslims, are taught this in their citizenship classes. I got to thinking about this while I was preparing this material. What do they teach in those citizenship classes? And I wonder if they tailor what they teach to where they're coming from, their countries of origin, or whether they even have classes just for people coming in from Syria or wherever they're from. Did you know that Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States? And we had this treaty with Tripoli saying to the Muslims, hey, we don't have any problem with your religion, it's fine, we're fine with that. Well, surely one way of fostering greater cohesiveness in an increasingly diverse American society is to have a wider understanding of the principles of freedom and self-government. And a fervent devotion to that is really what the civil religion is. But we say that the pen is mightier than the sword, that words are ultimately more powerful than bullets, even though violence is sometimes needed. But what are we actually doing to destroy our enemies by making them our friends? Some have tried to distinguish between good and bad forms of emotional attachment to one's country, even trying to distinguish patriotism from nationalism. And you'll find many quotes on the internet. Well, this is one and this is the other, and that's exactly what they are. I say so. I don't think it would work to insist that those two words mean very different things, but there certainly is a big difference between loving one's country and hating other countries. Nor is it all the same thing to admire of what, at least much of what, one's own country does. Is he okay?
Doesn't like the vacuum.
All right. So there's a difference between being proud of what your country does and being proud of one's country no matter what it does. Is there anything good that cannot be exaggerated or distorted or misapplied until it becomes evil? Probably not. These sorts of questions turn out to be pertinent in this national election year when immigration is a huge issue in the United States. Something similar seems to have happened with the Brexit vote last week, in which the people of the UK voted to leave the European Union. And what about the violent attacks of murder and terror this year in the US, Europe, and Bangladesh just yesterday, for which Islamic extremists, I always understand that they claim credit for that. Yeah, for what credit? Certainly strong actions must be taken when lives are at risk, when we have to respond to these things, but any action should not encourage people to feel alienated from the societies that need their support and solidarity. That's the interesting thing about this whole debate about President Obama won't say the words Islamic terrorism. And he said, of course, in response, what difference would that make? Sam Harris, one of us, says it would make a big difference. But this is the problem with millions and tens of millions of foreign nationals, mostly from south of the border, that are in the U.S. illegally. It's our fault, our government's fault that this has happened. If you were them, you would have done the same thing, come up here, especially knowing that you're going to get away with it. But can we think of anything more likely to lead to the eventual fracture of our country, as some expect and even advocate for, than this, if it is allowed to go on indefinitely or grow into an even larger problem? So here's, the colors don't show up very well, but people have speculated that the U.S. Will fragment into different countries. Here's this thing they're calling ASLAT, and there are, it's not the Mexicans, but some people of Latino extraction talk about the Reconquista, to take back that part of the U.S., versus having the whole world coalesce into a North American Union. How many of you heard that term, the North American Union? Merge all these countries. So NAFTA may be one tiny step, just like the European Common Market was a step towards the European Union. I would also suggest in this regard reading Lincoln's first inaugural address, because at that time some states had already seceded, and he addresses that. It's a beautiful response, a good, wonderful arguments to what are said even today. While states had the right to secede, it was a war of northern aggression against the South. But Lincoln speculates about how, okay, so they're going to secede and make this confederacy, and then they're going to break apart too, and pretty soon you got all these little small units that can't get anything done. So it's been said that we're headed towards globalization, the latter path down here. But not everyone thinks that's the better way. Remember, there were riots and demonstrations in Seattle and other places against globalization. These are very urgent questions, a lot more urgent than what bathrooms people are going to use. Perhaps the bigger question is whether people are really prepared to rationally consider these ideas. So we come to the fact that the opposite of nationalism is really internationalism. This relates to the fact that, in fact, Marxists traditionally held that nationalism was a bad thing. Why? Because they saw it as facilitating wars between the wealthy people of different nations. So as they fought over markets and colonies and so forth, and this in turn was a burden on the lower classes who had to fight the wars, and the hindrance, especially a hindrance to their recognizing, participating in, and winning the real conflict of class struggle. That's why the Communist Manifesto ends with the words, working men, by the way, it does say men, you think they would have gotten it better than the Declaration by that time, but working men of all countries unite. Well, there's clearly material here for many more of our church services. What becomes of the American civil religion in the future? Is there a place for it in the New World Order or wherever we're headed in terms of internationalism? You'd think the New World Order would not have been demonized the way it has, but that's another thing now. That remember, the UN has black helicopters that are going to come down on us and so forth. The United Nations certainly seems to have adopted statements and principles in line with the idea of Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and James Madison and others. But where is the UN headed? Black helicopters. So the message today is simply that the same values on which our own Freethought is based, a search for and an acceptance of facts, a devotion to reason, and a love for this one life and the others with which we share it, are much the same values of the American civil religion. We see the God stuff being slipped in all the time, yes, but we also see that it really has nothing to do with what's important. Kind of like someone who has to put ketchup on everything to make it good enough to eat. So we put up with their idiosyncrasies as best we can and hope for their eventual enlightenment. The United States is the country, after all, that has its roots deeply in the Enlightenment. The United States could never have even got its start without the Enlightenment, and we should be very happy, I think, that this continent existed and was discovered by the Europeans when it was. Just think if it hadn't been. So please think about that. How are we doing on time? You got some discussion? Yes? You can come in. Don't worry, you're not disturbing God.
11:22.
Not in this church.
Plenty of time.
Yes?
Did you see on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Twitter about rationality?
About what?
Supporting the country about rationality based on.
Rationality. I did see his lecture where he, here's the talking stick, whoever has this has the floor. I did see there's a YouTube video where he talks about the fact that here's some other countries where they got Marconi on their money and other scientists, and the U.S. doesn't have anything like that. Thought about that with this new $20 bill, going to have Harriet Tubman on it, but obviously that's more in line with our civil religion than it is with extolling scientists, inventors, and so forth. Go ahead. Just don't hold it too close. Maybe I'm too close to you with my magnetic field.
Anyway, rationality has a one-line constitution. All policies shall be based on the weight of evidence.
Anybody else have comment about any of these subjects, issues? Did you learn something today? Did you find some things out you didn't know before? Yeah? How many people go to church and get that? Okay, because we're not limited to a book review of one book. Yes? Anybody else have? There we go.
Does this work? Okay, that works a little bit better. One of the things I challenge the Christians on is there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about, I think it's a Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, the sky is his handiwork or whatever. And I challenged him, I said, well, if that declares the glory of God, why don't you study that more carefully? And in the study of that, you realize it doesn't match up with what the ancient said, and maybe you should study the hand of God. It's right in front of you.
Right.
Well, of course, that's what Galileo said, is this book, meaning the universe is open to all of us, and that's how we know what's really out there, and that there's this other book by it, so the two are separate. How many think David should be a radio announcer? Got the voice for it. Anybody else have a comment?
Regarding the deGrasse Tyson's proposal,
Rationalia?
yeah, it sounds very interesting. I'm not sure how it would play out, though. I like science as being an independent party to politics as advisory, because because in the system that Neil deGrasse Tyson proposed, scientists become the dictating power, which would be great in one sense, but what happens is that all of a sudden, science is going to become politics itself. And it's a tool that's, unfortunately, as we've seen in cases like intelligent design, can be distorted and perverted. At which point, that the science becomes a political institution, how are we supposed to really make progress?
I would say to Neil deGrasse Tyson, let's educate our fellow Americans as to what science is and what religion is not. That's just as important. Religion is not a parallel system to science. So instead of all having to move someplace and starting a new country, we can make our country more true to the ideals of the Enlightenment, which is very much into evidence, facts, and reason. I mean, that's where it all started. How else could you get people to agree about something, since they all had different languages, cultures, religions, that can come from different parts of the world and different historical roots? That's exactly what we've been trying to do in America. All the sensible people did move someplace and try to make a go of it. So we just have to redouble our efforts. So,
Not many of the Americans are happening more, unfortunately.
well, don't we have to do a better job of actually teaching and getting people to understand America's civil religion? And people have very different views about this, which is okay. I mean, that's good. In fact, mother of my kids, when I went to the National Archives, got some shirts in their gift shop, one of which is "We the People, the Constitution." And she related to me when she went out with that shirt that she would have people come up to her, some of them would say, "I knew you're a Democrat, you got that cool Constitution shirt that proclaims our principles, blah, blah." And we'd have people from, people come up and say, "I knew you're a Republican, yeah, you're for the Constitution." So everybody's reading into it, what they want to. Really, again, just like Christianity, you got the liberal branches and the conservative branches, and they read into it what they want. So I think as long as we keep the discussion going, we're in good shape.
The movie Jesus Camp, did anybody see Jesus Camp?
Yeah.
Jesus Camp?
When I saw it, it's basically about,
Jesus Camp was basically a documentary about these camps that kids go to learn about Jesus. Pretty fundamentalist. But the interesting thing was in the movie was I was watching it, and to me, clearly the movie was making fun of it. But there were other Christians in the audience that after the movie played, they were like, "Praise Jesus." So they saw what they wanted to see in the movie. It's
Right.
really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, very true.
They always see what they want to see. No matter what it is, you look on Facebook and close it.
And the scary thing is, we all do too,
I know.
to some degree. But on the other hand, knowing that that's part of how the neural net works, we can look for, and that's a good question. I think we've had church services where this theme has creeped in. What do we believe today that 100 years from now we look back on as those idiots? How could they think that? So, how many are coming to Jason's? We're going to go and meet there afterwards, but before we get to that part, I think we are kind of running out of time. Never used to wear a watch, but now, of course, the phone is a camera and a clock and everything else. So it's just about 11:30. A couple more slides I just want to hit here because then we probably should just spend a lot more time on this sort of thing. We have bills we have to pay for this room. I'm not paid. John here's our videographer. He's not paid. Taylor's not paid for bringing the root beer. Nobody gets paid except for the hotel and the newspapers where we do our advertising. And you might think, well, how many, in the past we've had internal debates, well, how many people does that really bring in? Yeah, but it's not our purpose is to bring people in, it's also to be our banner. Same as billboards on the freeway, people read the paper. Some people still read the paper, right? And it's our banner saying, we're here. We've been here, we're gonna be here. same as just a little sign out front here, just think of all the guests walking here, checking in and checking out. Oh, Atheist Church, Freethought Church. So anything like that, it's all helpful for us. And the big reason for you to give us your money is that because of the things we do, we're doing together what none of us can do on our own. And if you have ideas about things we ought to be able to do and can do as a church, especially if you're willing to put forth the effort, help it to be done. It doesn't have to be an ongoing project. It can be a one-off. We had some years back someone who was interested in sending out a letter to all the, not the nursing homes, but the, what do you call it, when people go and die, basically?
Hospice.
Hospice, okay. So hospice is all over the place here. In fact, we had a member in hospice last summer. So he was interested in sending out a letter saying, hey, you know, some of your people are unbelievers. And if you want help for counseling or people to come visit them, let us know. And we did that. We actually had a couple of bites, both of which got canceled for some reason. It was basically the arrangement was come on out and tell us about how we can serve the needs of our unbelieving clients better, and then at the last minute, no, we decided not to do that. But you know, you got to try 10 times sometimes before you succeed once. So if you have ideas like that or any other ideas, please get with us, because this is your vehicle for doing together what we can't do individually. Help us promote your values. Not only you come here and learn, and then you go out and tell people about things. So later on today, you're going to say, hey, you know, this is the anniversary of the Battle of Wyoming, huh? And you'll explain it to them, and they'll think, man, what a smart person you are. And demonstrate your commitment to be the future that you wish to see. So the rainbow colored boxes in the back of the rooms, I think the slots are big enough to like gold coins and checks and cash and all sorts of things through there. So go on the Joy of Reason, and then next time we're going to be talking about education. 5 weeks from now in this very room, know God willing.
Business waging war with money we could have better spent.